Picture this. The economy contracts by 30%. You have a master's degree in corporate management, but the corporation no longer exists. Your neighbor is a mechanic who can fix a tractor or a water pump, and he's earning double your old salary paid in food and fuel. By the end of this video, you will understand the hierarchy of utility and which 3 skills are mathematically guaranteed to retain value when the system breaks. This is not a thought experiment. It is a pattern. In Russia, after the Soviet collapse, output fell by roughly a third across the first half of the 1990s. By 1998, barter had spread so deeply that about half of industrial sales were being conducted without normal cash settlement. In that environment, titles did not disappear overnight, but their purchasing power did. An office credential could still sound impressive at dinner. It just could not restart a boiler, repair a pump, source food, or get your wages paid on time. The same inversion appeared again in Venezuela. Real GDP is estimated to have collapsed by more than 75% between 2013 and 2021. In agricultural towns, domestic trade broke down under road decay and gasoline shortages, pushing communities toward subsistence. In plain language, when transport fails, abstraction loses value and proximity to physical necessity gains it. That is the first thing most people misunderstand about crisis. They think the rich get poorer and the poor get desperate. That happens. But beneath it, something more important happens. The market begins ranking human beings by immediate usefulness. And once that repricing starts, the hierarchy is brutal. A manager needs a functioning institution. A mechanic needs a broken machine. A consultant needs a budget. A grower needs soil, seed, and demand. A strategist needs a client. A medic needs a patient. This video is about that repricing mechanism, how it showed up in Russia, Cuba, and Venezuela, why AI may accelerate the same logic in white-collar work, and how to audit your own skills before the system does it for you. The reason this inversion happens is simple, but most people spend their whole lives inside systems designed to hide it. A credential is not useless. It can be enormously valuable, but its value is conditional. It depends on a chain of institutional promises holding together at the same time. Employers must remain solvent. Payroll must clear contracts, must be enforceable. Banks must function, suppliers must deliver, and the wider public must still believe that tomorrow will look enough like today for specialization to make sense. When that chain weakens, labor is repriced. Post-Soviet Russia is one of the clearest autopsies. By the late 1990s, non-payments had become a defining feature of the economy. IMF work on Russia notes that between 1995 and 1998, total payables jumped from under 20% to nearly 60% of GDP, while overdue payables rose from roughly 15% to 40%. By 1998, the share of industrial sales conducted in barter had reached about 50%. This matters because once money stops clearing cleanly, the market stops asking, "What is your title?" and starts asking, "What can you do for me right now, locally, with limited trust?" That is the real hierarchy of utility. At the top are functions tied directly to physical continuity: heat, water, food, transport, repair, health, fuel, security, and basic logistics. These do not require optimism. They do not require a board meeting. They do not even require stable currency for very long. They only require need. Below that sit coordination roles, analytical roles, and managerial layers whose value is real in normal times but increasingly indirect under stress. In an expanding system, the manager of a regional division may earn more than the person who repairs the pumps in that division. In a contracting system, that ranking can reverse with shocking speed because the pump repair is attached to immediate consequence while the manager is attached to organizational surplus. Russia also shows what this looked like on the ground. Wage arrears became a major labor market adjustment mechanism, and World Bank analysis describes growing arrears, wage payments in kind, and a real decline in wages as central features of the period. In other words, even if you technically still had a job, your salary could become delayed, partial, or converted into goods instead of money. Under those conditions, practical skill beats formal status because practical skill can be exchanged outside the failing wage system. This is why skills require only a need is not a slogan. It is a pricing law. If your competence depends on intact institutions, you are valuable conditionally. If your competence solves a biological or mechanical problem at the point of failure, you are valuable immediately. And in the crisis, immediate value usually wins. If Russia shows the wage mechanism, Cuba shows the moral inversion. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Cuba lost the external support structure that had underwritten its economy for decades. Fuel imports fell sharply. Food availability dropped. Public transport broke down. Blackouts became routine. This period, officially called the Special Period in Peacetime, was not just an economic downturn. It was a forced repricing of daily life. Calories, transport, and access to hard currency suddenly mattered more than professional prestige, and that is where the official story collides with the forensic reality. In a functioning society, a doctor is high status because the system can afford to reward long training, institutional licensing, and professional hierarchy. But in a distorted survival economy, rewards migrate toward whatever touches foreign currency, transport access, or immediate exchange. Economists writing on Cuba documented that tourism and dollar access created deep income gaps between state professionals and people working in lower prestige service roles with access to tips. A taxi driver serving tourists could out-earn a physician paid in weak local wages. A waiter with dollar access could out-earn an engineer. The hierarchy did not vanish. It flipped. That is the part people resist because it feels unfair. It is unfair. Imagine spending years becoming a physician, only to discover that your real economic advantage has been subordinated to a simpler fact. Tourists carry dollars, and dollars buy food. Under those conditions, the question is no longer what is socially honorable. The question becomes, what clears? What produces transport, calories, medicine, hard currency, or tradable repair? Everything else is pushed down the ladder. The street-level reality was even harsher than the income tables suggest. Cuba experienced severe shortages in food, fuel, and electricity during the early 1990s, with average caloric intake falling significantly before partially recovering later in the decade. People adapted with bicycles, improvised transport, urban agriculture, household repairs, informal exchange, and constant substitution. In that world, the person who could keep a generator alive, grow food in constrained space, or treat illness directly, had a kind of value that no diploma alone could guarantee. This is the lesson hidden inside the Cuban case. A society can continue praising abstract excellence long after it has stopped paying for it. And once that happens, survival belongs to people whose skills convert directly into function. Not someday, not after approval. Today, in the next section, that same logic moves into the present, because AI is beginning to pressure white-collar work in a way that looks less like innovation theater and more like a slow institutional repricing of cognitive labor. Now bring that logic into the present. For years, people assumed automation would come first for routine manual labor. Generative AI has complicated that story. The IMF has warned that AI will affect about 40% of jobs worldwide, with higher exposure in advanced economies. OECD analysis likewise finds that occupations requiring formal education and knowledge work, including managers, IT professionals, and science and engineering roles, tend to be more exposed to AI than jobs built around manual skill strength, cleaning, food preparation, and other physical tasks. That does not mean plumbers are invincible, or that software engineers disappear tomorrow. It means the first zone of pressure is no longer the factory floor alone. It is the layer of work made of text, formatting, summarization, customer handling, document review, scheduling, coding assistance, and repeatable cognitive output. The International Labor Organization's 2025 update stresses that generative AI exposure is highest in clerical, and some highly digitized cognitive occupations, while full job replacement remains less likely than task transformation and partial automation. This is the critical distinction. A white-collar role often contains many tasks that can be unbundled, standardized, and compressed by software. A mechanic repairing a failing pump at a muddy field at dusk is dealing with context, friction, improvisation, force, risk, and physical consequence. That is harder to commoditize because the work is not just knowledge. It is embodied judgment under real constraints. Recent empirical work from Anthropic reinforces the point. Their economic index research finds substantial real-world AI use in software, writing, analysis, customer support, and administrative knowledge tasks. Precisely because those activities can be expressed in language and broken into modular subroutines, that is where repricing begins. Not necessarily through mass unemployment first, but through downward pressure on wages, thinning junior ranks, and the collapse of billing power for tasks that used to look scarce. So the old status ladder is being hit from two directions at once. In a collapse, institutions fail and abstract credentials lose clearing power. In an AI shock, institutions remain standing, but more of their cognitive workload becomes cheap. Either way, the lesson is the same. When a skill is distant from physical necessity and easy to scale through systems, its market protection is weaker than most professionals think. So what actually holds value? Not in theory, not on LinkedIn. In the forensic record, again and again, 3 categories survive the repricing better than most others, because they are attached to non-optional human needs and difficult to outsource physical realities. The first is mechanical repair. When systems degrade, societies do not become simpler. They become more fragile. Pumps fail. Vehicles fail. Generators fail. Irrigation fails. Refrigeration fails. The person who can diagnose, improvise, cannibalize parts, and return a machine to service is not selling prestige. He is restoring continuity. In low-trust environments, that kind of competence can be paid in cash, food, fuel, transport access, or reciprocal protection because the value is immediate and visible. The second is caloric production. Food is not just a commodity in a crisis. It becomes a control point. Cuba's special period pushed large-scale adaptation into urban agriculture and hyper-local food production as imports collapsed and fuel shortages disrupted normal distribution. FAO's review of the period describes a major shift toward local production and labor-intensive cultivation under conditions of acute scarcity. The lesson is not that everyone must become a full-time farmer. It is that anyone who can increase edible output, preserve food, manage water, maintain soil, or support local distribution acquires utility that survives monetary disorder. The third is direct medical care, not hospital bureaucracy, not billing systems, not administrative healthcare complexity. Direct care. The ability to stop bleeding, manage infection risk, stabilize a vulnerable person, handle common illness, maintain sanitation, and make competent triage decisions. In unstable environments, medical value compresses downward toward what can be delivered with limited infrastructure and still change an outcome. This is the tangible triad: repair, calories, care. These are not the only resilient skills, but they are unusually durable because they satisfy 3 filters at once. They answer an unavoidable need. They work locally. And they remain difficult to fully automate, offshore, or postpone. That is why the real hedge is not choosing between digital and analog. It is building a bridge between them. In the final section, we turn that into a practical audit. How to score your own human capital, where most viewers will discover they are overexposed, and the one decision that separates adaptation from wishful thinking. Here's the protocol. Run a personal human capital audit. Take every skill you have and score it against 4 questions. First, does this skill solve an immediate problem tied to survival, continuity, or physical function? Second, can I perform it locally, with limited infrastructure? Third, would someone still trade for it if money weakened, institutions stalled, or software made my current role cheaper? Fourth, Can this skill be demonstrated directly rather than merely certified? That is the audit. If most of your earning power depends on credentials, platforms, corporate budgets, or abstract coordination, you are not necessarily in danger tomorrow. But you are exposed. The forensic record from Russia, Cuba, and Venezuela shows that when systems distort, value migrates toward necessity, locality, and direct function. The more steps between your competence and a real-world outcome, the more fragile your position becomes. So the answer is not panic, it is pairing. Keep the digital income. Keep the modern career. But add one analog skill that clears under pressure. Learn to repair something essential. Learn to produce some part of food or water continuity. Learn direct care that matters before an institution arrives, because in stable times, the market rewards specialization. In unstable times, it rewards utility. And eventually, every society asks the same question of every person. Are you valuable because a system recognizes you? Or are you valuable because when something breaks, you can still make life work?